Hello everyone, welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. Ohio. To uncover the unimaginable events of the Pike County Massacre, a brutal crime that left an entire community distraught and searching for answers. In the early hours of April 22, 2016, there was a series of murders in 4 different homes, a well-planned murder targeting the members of the Rhodes family. What came next was a complex investigation that searched deeply into the dark side of rural America. Pike County, Ohio is a quiet, rural area where the community is close-knit and life is generally peaceful, but on April 22, 2016, that peace was shattered. 8 members of the Rodden family were discovered brutally murdered in their homes. Among the victims were 7 adults and a teenage boy, all killed in what seemed like a meticulously planned attack. Christopher Rodden Sr., aged 40, worked as a laborer at Big Bear Lake Family Resort in Lucasville, Ohio. He shared a trailer home with his cousin Gary Rodden, aged 38, who was also Christopher's best friend. Gary was understanding of Christopher's difficulties with drug and alcohol abuse. Their trailer was located at 4077 Union Hill Road. Christopher's ex-wife Dana Manley Rodden, aged 37, worked as a nursing assistant at Hillside Skilled Nursing Rehabilitation Center in Peebles, Ohio. Now close together, they had 3 children: 20-year-old Clarence, also known as Frankie, 19-year-old Hannah Mae, and 16-year-old Chris Jr. Dana, Hannah, and Chris Jr. lived together at 3122 Union Hill Road, about a mile and a half from Christopher and Gary's residence. Meanwhile, Frankie and his fiancée lived nearby in their own trailer. Frankie worked at a local sawmill and occasionally joined his father at Big Bear Lake. He was an avid hunter and fisherman who enjoyed demolition derbies. Frankie was engaged to Hannah Hazel Gilly, a 20-year-old lady. They had a 3-year-old son from a previous relationship and a 6-month-old baby boy together. Hannah Hazel was described as a devoted mother to their infant son and deeply in love with Frankie. Hannah Mae Rodden worked as a certified nursing assistant, or CNA, and was nearing high school graduation. On May 2016, she had 2 daughters: 2-year-old Sophia, who came as a result of a previous relationship with Jake Wagner, and Kylie, who was just 5 days old. Hannah was in a custody battle with Jake Wagner for the custody of Sophia, but Kylie lived with her. Hannah Mae was known for her dedication as a mother to her daughters. Chris Rodden Jr. was a freshman at Piketon High School. Recently licensed to drive, he lived with his mother Dana Manley Rodden, his sister Hannah, and Hannah's children. Kenneth Rodden, aged 44, Christopher Sr.'s brother, was fond of motorcycles and had a daily routine that started at 4:30 a.m. commuting to Columbus, Ohio for work at a utility company. He lived in a camper at 799 Left Fork Road, approximately 15 minutes from the rest of the family. Bobby Jo Manley, Dana's sister, was close to the Rodden family. Christopher Sr. had been assisting Bobby Jo financially since she was unemployed. Bobby Jo regularly visited their property at 4077 Union Hill Road to help care for their animals. On Friday, April 22, 2016, Bobby Jo made a disturbing discovery when she arrived at Christopher and Gary's trailer to feed the livestock. Like she usually did every morning, she found the dogs outside, which was unusual because they were usually kept indoors. And she also found Christopher's truck still in the driveway when he should have been at work by this time. Then upon entering, she found Christopher Sr. and Gary deceased inside the trailer. There was blood all around the front door in the living room. It was obvious the furniture had been moved, and then there was a trail that led to the back bedrooms, where their bodies were discovered on the floor under a comforter. The scene showed that they had been beaten badly after Bobby Joe discovered the bodies of her brother-in-law and his cousin. She immediately called the police to inform them about this. James, Bobby's cousin, noticed she had been gone for too long. He saw her leave in the morning to go feed the chickens but knew she should have been back by that time. He drove to Christopher's home on Union Hill Road to check on her, but upon arrival he saw Bobby Joe hastily leave in her truck. All she could say was, "Something terrible has happened." Concerned James followed her immediately. Bobby drove over to Frankie's trailer to alert him of what she had just seen. On the morning of April 22, 2016, police are called to Union Hill Road in Pike County, Ohio. There's blood all over the house. Never have we lost so many people to a murder or murderers in this county. 6 adults and 1 teenager are found murdered execution style across 3 properties. They're all members of the same family, the Rodden family. They arrived at Frankie's trailer where his 3-year-old son answered the door and mentioned that his father had a lot of blood inside. They found Frankie and his fiancée Hannah Hazel lying in bed covered in blood with their 6-month-old baby unharmed but also covered in blood. Their hearts were gripped with fear. Just some minutes ago they had seen the lifeless bodies of Christopher and Gary, only to meet Frankie and his fiancée also dead. This was quickly turning into a nightmare. Bobby called 911 earlier and she knew they would be at Christopher's trailer soon, so she didn't need to call them again. All she needed was to wake up from this terrible nightmare. James suggested that he drive over to Dana's house to inform her of what was happening and to make sure she was safe. James Manley recalled being off work the morning the bodies were discovered and hearing there was something wrong at the Roddens' house. His sister Bobby Joe Manley had gone there to do her daily work for Chris Rodden Sr. and his family. James Manley recalled what it was like inside the bedroom of Chris's son Frankie and his fiancée Hannah Gilly. That's where the family found this couple's 6-month-old son Ruger covered in blood and shown here. Bobby stayed with the kids and James sped off to get Dana. When he got there he found the door open. He called Dana's name but got no response. Walking through the house toward Dana's room, James found her room pitch dark. After searching through the darkness he found her on her bed, but she wasn't responding and it became obvious to him that she was also dead. He ran out of the house. Terrified and confused about what to do, he couldn't bring himself to enter the trailer again or face the fact that his cousin was dead. Even though he heard 5-day-old Kylie crying from inside the trailer, he then decided to quickly go over to his house to get his wife and then come back to get Kylie. When James got back to Dana's trailer with his wife, he still couldn't bring himself to enter the trailer. Fortunately, the police passed by them on their way to the crime scene at Christopher's house, so they flagged them down. After the police entered the trailer, they found not just Dana but also Chris Jr. and Hannah dead in their beds and covered in blood. Hannah's 5-day-old infant Kylie was next to her diaper soaked in blood. Fortunately, Hannah's 3-year-old daughter Sophie was unharmed as she was with her father at the time. Following the discovery of these 7 family members, James decided to check on Kenneth at his trailer 15 minutes away by 1:26 p.m. that same day. 911 received another call reporting Kenneth's body as the 8th victim. The police began investigating to try and figure out what went down. When they checked Frankie and Hannah Hazel's trailer, they found them in their beds with gunshot wounds to their heads. Autopsies revealed Frankie had been shot 3 times at close range, while Hannah Hazel suffered 5 gunshot wounds to her face and head, with evidence of the baby moving and climbing on her. After the attack, Hannah Hazel was discovered wearing an unclipped nursing bra, suggesting she may have been nursing her baby at the time of her death. After the bodies were removed and sent for examination, investigators found significant evidence at the crime scene. In the bedroom where the victims were shot, investigators recovered 5 cartridge casings from Remington brand bullets. Additionally, another bullet belonging to a different brand was found near the bedroom door, indicating the use of multiple firearms during the crime. Dana was found with 5 gunshot wounds to her head, Hannah Mae with 2 and Chris Rudin Jr. with 4, including 2 to the top of his head. Kenneth Rhoden was shot once in the right eye and Gary Rhoden sustained 3 close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Chris Rudin Sr. exhibited defensive injuries, suggesting a struggle with the attacker. He sustained 9 gunshot wounds to his head, torso and arms, indicating the severity of the assault. The medical examiner determined that Gary and Chris Sr. were likely murdered around 11 p.m. on Thursday, April 21, the night before their bodies were discovered. Most family members were believed to have been killed while they were sleeping, with a few exceptions. The murders appeared to be execution-style shootings occurring late on April 21 into April 22, 2016. Much of the forensic focus was on the property where Gary and Chris Sr. lived, rural area with a trailer, several cars, a semi-truck and a shed. Inside the trailer, investigators found extensive blood spatter and stains. Even on the ceilings, evidence suggested that at least one victim, likely Chris Sr., was initially shot in the living room and then moved to the bedroom where they were ultimately found. The investigation uncovered multiple shoe prints tracking blood throughout the trailer, indicating the movement of a body from the living room through the kitchen to the bedroom. Bullet holes were found in the door frame leading into the trailer and in the wall, suggesting the assailants may have fired from the porch. Investigators also recovered bullets and bullet fragments from various locations: the living room, bedroom, front porch and kitchen. Despite Bobby Joe's statement about the recliner being moved, no other signs of struggle were found. No overturned furniture, displaced items or damaged walls. DNA swabs were taken from the doorknob, blood pooling areas, clothing items and bullets recovered from the scene, but none yielded any match to a suspect. Outside at another building on the property, police found a door with a broken handle, likely forced open. Above this door was a surveillance camera, but all wiring had been disconnected and the recording device was missing, indicating that the intruders knew how to evade detection. Additional DNA was collected from outdoor items such as cords, cameras, a Mountain Dew bottle and cigarette butts, all of which matched the victims but provided no new leads. During a search of the property, investigators discovered 3 sites where marijuana was grown, spread across 4 locations. However, the way they were planted showed that they were grown for commercial purposes rather than personal use. This made the investigators wonder whether the murders were linked to a drug cartel. In October 2016, police announced a significant shift in their investigation into the Rhoden family murders. Initially believed to be a cartel-style killing, they now suspected an execution-style killing, potentially linked to a local marijuana operation. The police also believed the killers were familiar with the area and the properties. Months passed without progress, despite having extensive evidence including blood, bullet casings and 4 crime scenes. They couldn't find usable DNA evidence. By June 2017, police turned their attention to the Wagner family: George Billy Wagner, 3, his wife Angela, and their sons George Wagner, 4, and Edward Jake Wagner. They wanted to know if the Wagner family had any clue that could help in the investigation. Jake Wagner had a history with Hannah Rhoden, whom he had his daughter Sophia with. Their relationship began when Hannah was 13 and Jake was 18. The two had a custody battle over Sophie after they broke up, with allegations of abuse and questions about the paternity of Hannah's younger child Kylie. The Wagner family allegedly tried to get Hannah to sign away her parental rights to Sophie just weeks before her murder. Jake's grandmother Rita Newcomb forged a custody document in the case. The Wagner family claimed that because of how close they were to the Rhodens, they were devastated by the news and decided to move to Alaska. As the investigation continued, police discovered the custody battle between Jake and Hannah was more intense than initially thought. Starting as far back as November 2013, they discovered that Jake pressured Hannah to move in with his family so they could raise their daughter Sophie together, but she consistently refused because she knew he just wanted to control her. Jake sent texts demanding she choose to live with him or lose him and Sophie for months before she was shot to death. Hannah Mae Roden and Jake Wagner had a testy exchange that Jake secretly recorded. It was about custody issues involving the young daughter they had together. Hannah told Jake in so many words he didn't have the right to be so controlling. He claimed he wasn't controlling her but wanted to build a home with her. Their disagreements continued for 2 years, until Hannah ended their relationship on March 2015 when she started receiving threats and violence from Jake. On December 2015, Hannah expressed her refusal to let Jake have custody of Sophie in a Facebook message. These all made the police suspect them even more. The police dug into the case some more and finally some leads were obtained. On November 2018, 6 of the Wagner family were arrested. They were accused of plotting and murdering 8 of the Roden family members just so they could take custody of Hannah's daughter Sophie. The arrests came with evidence including Angela Wagner's hacking of Hannah's Facebook profile and the purchasing of new shoes and a truck to avoid being detected. They also prepared silencers for the guns used and studied the victims' routines. In June 2019, the court dropped charges against Billy's mother Federica, who was initially accused of lying to the court and hiding bulletproof vests worn during the murders. We begin with a huge break in the brutal murders of 8 members of the Roden family in Pike County. Today we have the answer: members of one family conspired, planned, carried out and then allegedly covered up their violent act to wipe out members of another family. During the court trials, Jake confessed that he was responsible for killing 5 out of the 8 victims. He confessed to also being involved in all of the 8 murders. His cooperation helped the police discover critical evidence, including the truck George Wagner purchased specifically to be used on the night of the murders, and the police also discovered guns hidden inside cement blocks. In addition to the murder charges, Jake admitted he was guilty of multiple offenses including conspiracy, burglary, possession of dangerous weapons, evidence tampering, forgery and more. He received a life sentence in prison as punishment. During the trials, Jake claimed that he felt compelled to kill Hannah and then also her brother, father and uncle just to prevent them from retaliating. He also claimed that all other victims were killed just so he could eliminate any witnesses. Before the murders, the Wagner family prepared themselves by acquiring gun silencers, a phone jammer and bug detectors. Jake also admitted to using a Walter Colt 1911 handgun to kill 5 victims, while his father Billy used a .40 caliber Glock to kill 3 others. George, despite not physically killing anyone, was implicated in planning, executing and covering up the murders. George Wagner took to the witness stand himself and stated that he had no prior knowledge of the murders and would never participate if his family had asked him to. He admitted that he was involved in theft but denied knowing about his family's capability for murder, especially of 8 people. That all turned out to be lies because he was later on found guilty and received life imprisonment without parole. Angela was first charged with murder alongside her son Jake, but her murder charges were dropped after the court confirmed she was at home with her grandchildren during the murders. Instead, she was charged with conspiracy, burglary, evidence tampering, forgery, property misuse and weapon possession. Angela then also received a 30-year prison sentence and also agreed to testify against her family members as well. Following the verdict, the family members and friends of the Rodens made emotional statements in court condemning the senseless crime. Meanwhile, Billy Wagner's trial has been moved to 2025, with him denying all allegations placed against him even when his family had already testified to them. This case involved 3 small children who are now in safe custody with family members. When we think about what really caused the murders of the Roden family, the custody dispute over Sophie stands out as the only driving force leading to the planning and then the gruesome murder of these victims. The surviving children who experienced the trauma of Witnessing their parents' murders will carry the scars of this tragedy for a long time. The legal proceedings against the Wagner family have been lengthy and complex. Plea deals and negotiations have been ongoing, with Jake Wagner pleading guilty in 2021 to avoid the death penalty and agreeing to testify against his family members. The trials for the other accused family members are still unfolding, with the community and nation watching closely. Story 2. Have you heard the story of the deaths of 4 students that happened in 2022 in the rural college town of Moscow, Idaho, a town that had not witnessed a murder in 7 years? Prior to this particular incident, we'll be looking at how these 4 bright young people unfortunately had their lives taken from them, and how far the process to get justice for them has gone. As always, our love and respect goes out to all those who knew and loved the victims and all those affected by this case. It was a sad morning in Moscow, Idaho. On November 13, the police found 4 students of the University of Idaho stabbed to death at their apartment. The police had been called by 2 housemates who found the students. The news of the death sparked serious outrage throughout Moscow, Idaho, and the entire United States. The police then arrested a 28-year-old PhD student from another university. After over 6 weeks of investigating, the case is still ongoing in court, but a gag order has kept most of the details of the hearings away from the general public. A gag order is issued by a court to limit the information that can be passed to the public concerning an ongoing court case. Hence, we'll be looking at available information that has been pieced together about this case from the time of the occurrence to the ongoing investigation. 2 of the victims of the gruesome murder were 21-year-old Madison Mogen and her best friend Kaylee Goncalves, also 21. Both were in their senior year at the University of Idaho. The other 2 victims were their housemates Xana Kernel, who was 20 and a junior, and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin, a freshman and also 20. Kaylee Goncalves, a native of Rathdrum, Idaho, was one of 5 children in her family and was only a few weeks away from graduating college early. She was majoring in general studies at the College of Letters, Arts and Social Sciences. Apparently she was going to move to Austin, Texas to work at an IT firm, and had recently moved out of the house where she was killed, but returned to go out with her best friend. The second victim, Madison Mogen, was a marketing major who had a job at Mad Greek restaurant where Xana, another of the victims, also worked. According to Madison's dad, Ben Mogen, she and Goncalves had been inseparable since the 6th grade. Goncalves' mother also affirmed that their family thought of Mogen as one of their own kids, as the pair had grown up together. Kay and Madison were both in the same bed when it happened. Xana Kernel was also majoring in marketing at the University of Idaho. She and her family lived in Andale, Arizona before they moved to Post Falls, Idaho. Kernel was an athlete in high school, and when she graduated she decorated a board with the words "For the lives that I will change." Her family members have spoken about her as a very positive, funny and lovable person. Her elder sister Jasmine Kernel remember her fondly in a speech, telling everyone how Xana was a very light-hearted person and could lift a room. She was a server at Mad Greek restaurant and was in a romantic relationship with the 4th victim, Ethan Chapin. Ethan was the only male victim of the homicides. He was part of a set of triplets with a brother Hunter and a sister Maisie, together with their parents Jim and Stacy Chapin. They were a very close-knit family. He was from the small town of Conway, Washington, and attended University of Idaho with his siblings. According to his mother, Ethan was friends with Xana before they started dating. He was spending the night at the apartment house with his girlfriend after a party when the murders took place. The sad incident took place after they returned to their flat in the early hours of the morning. Following a night out, Xana and Ethan were reported to have attended a party at Ethan's Sigma Chi fraternity, only a short walk away from the apartment house where they were eventually murdered. Kaylee and Madison, on the other hand, went out to a downtown bar called the Corner Club at around 10 p.m. Kaylee had earlier posted pictures of her and her friends on Instagram that night, and she added the caption, "One lucky girl to be surrounded by these people every day." With a white heart emoji, the victims were reported to have returned home in the early hours of the morning on November 13. According to information released by investigators, Xana and Ethan got back home at around 1:45 a.m. while Kay and Madison went home through a car ride first thought to be an Uber by investigators and returned at about 1:56 a.m. Kay and Madison were also captured on a food truck's Twitch live stream around 1:30 a.m. ordering food and talking with each other before they headed home. Available images we have of them are in this surveillance footage obtained by ABC News. They're heading towards a local food truck which is about a 6-minute walk from the bar. Police say this man with them is not a suspect. This is the grub truck. They have been streaming live on Twitch since about 10 p.m. and around 1:41 a.m. we see all three of them walk into frame. Maddie and Kay order food. They wait around for about 10 minutes. Around 1:51 a.m. they grab food from the truck window and walk out of frame. Police reports claimed that the attack was likely carried out when victims were in bed. They estimated that the murders happened between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Evidence like the DoorDash delivery that was made to Xana Kernel at 4 a.m. and the investigation of her phone that showed that she was on TikTok at 4:12 a.m. supported this idea. The victims were attacked on the second and third floors of the house. Xana and Ethan in Xana's room on the second floor, Kay and Madison in Madison's room on the third floor. When the authorities arrived at the scene, they found the victims with stab wounds and the walls of their rooms were splattered with blood. The other students living in the house were left alone. In the court documents, one of the surviving roommates told investigators that she was woken up by a noise in the house during the morning of the attack and she opened her door twice during that period. She claimed that the second time she heard a sound like crying coming from Xana's room, as well as a male voice that said, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." The roommate also told the investigators that when she opened her door a third time, she saw a man whom she did not recognize walk past her and leave through the sliding door while she stood there in a shocked state before locking herself in her room. The affidavit states that the same surviving roommate says she hears what sounds like crying coming from Xana's room. She opens her door a second time and says she hears a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." At 4:17 a.m. the security camera on a neighbor's home picks up distorted audio of what sounds like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times. This camera is less than 50 feet from Xana's bedroom. The affidavit states their surviving roommate then opens her door a third time. She sees a masked man walking past her towards the sliding glass door in the kitchen. In frozen shock, she locks her door. She described the unknown figure as dressed in black and wearing a face mask to cover his nose and mouth. She also reported that the figure was about 5 feet 10 inches in or taller, athletically built with bushy eyebrows. When the remaining two housemates woke up later, they found the victims and called other friends to the house before calling 911 at 11:58 a.m. to request assistance with an unconscious person. 8 hours after the killings, a 911 call reports an unconscious person at the scene of the crime. Shortly after, Moscow police discovered the bodies of 4 students. The police did not find any signs of a break-in or a scuffle in the house. No damaged furniture or broken doors, and nothing seemed to be missing from the premises. They were left perplexed with no signs pointing to how the killer got in. A coroner described the site of the tragedy to journalists as traumatic. An investigation was immediately launched into the killings by the Moscow Police Department, supported by the Idaho State Police and the Lada County Sheriff's Office. The FBI also eventually got involved in the investigation. A reported Number of about 130 law officers were on the case from all agencies. The results of the preliminary autopsy conducted on the victims showed that they were most likely attacked with a large fixed blade knife and were stabbed multiple times, leading to their deaths. The results also suggested that the victims were asleep at the time of the attack, but some of them showed wounds gotten from trying to defend themselves. There were no signs of sexual assault and none of the victims were tied up or gagged. The final verdict given was homicide through stabbing. No weapon was found at the scene of the crime, only a tan leather knife sheath that would later prove important to the investigation. The police came out to announce that they believed that the attack was an isolated and targeted one, and there was no imminent threat to the community of Moscow. But with the culprit remaining unknown, the town, especially the college students, could not hide their tension in fear, and it didn't help matters when the police went back on their previous statement to claim due to the lack of a suspect they could not categorically say that there was no threat to the community. This did nothing to ease the fear of the students, however, as it was reported that some students left campus and went home to their families. The department also focused on dispelling misinformation, saying there is speculation without factual backing, stoking community fears and spreading false information. The mayor of the town, Art Bch, condemned the deaths as senseless acts of violence, while the president of the University of Idaho, Scott Green, offered his condolences to the families of the victims and the Moscow community because of the incident. The university canceled all its classes for Monday, November 14, 2022. The administration also planned a candlelight vigil to be held in honor of the victims at the University of Idaho Administration building lawn for November 16, but it was postponed for about 2 weeks because a significant number of students had left the campus. It was eventually held on November 30 with some family members of the victims in attendance. The police then began to request that the public help provide them with any pieces of evidence from that night, specifically video recordings of the house. They set up both a phone line and email for students and other residents to send any tips that they might have that would assist them with their investigation. December 7, no suspects have been publicly identified, and Moscow police appealed to the public for help. Any assistance you can give us. Anybody that owns one, anybody that knows of someone who owns one or may have been driving one, if you could get a hold of us through our tip line or call us directly, we'd appreciate that. The investigators reported that they had received at least 15,000 tips in just over a month. During a press conference on November 23, the chief of the police department in Moscow revealed that they had gotten a number of tips that K allegedly had a stalker and looked extensively into it, but they could not confirm it to be true or identify any such stalker at that time. After receiving numerous tips and conducting a lot of interviews on November 30, the police released a list of people who they believed were not involved in the crime. They included the 2 surviving roommates and everyone that was at the house when 911 was called, the driver who took Kay and Madison home, as well as Kale's former longtime boyfriend, a fellow student whom Kay and Madison called multiple times that night. They also revealed that they had not concluded whether the victims were the actual targets or the residents in general. On December 7, the police announced that they were investigating a white or light-colored Hyundai Elantra manufactured around 2011 to 2013, which had an unknown license plate and was captured on video by a camera in the neighborhood around the time of the murders. Investigators noticed that the car had made multiple passes along the same route near the residence, and another surveillance recording showed the car speeding away from the victim's neighborhood at 4:20 a.m. They did not confirm whether they believed the driver of the Elantra was connected to the killer, but shared their thoughts that the person might possess critical information concerning the case for the families of the victims. The period of the investigation proved to be a really difficult time during an interview on the Today Show. Christy Goncalves, the mother of one of the victims, revealed her frustration with the police. She claimed that the families of some of the victims felt that they were left in the dark about the investigation process. As she said, she only found out about the investigation of the Atlanta on the news along with everyone else instead of being briefed by the investigators, but they're critical of authorities for what they called poor communication with victims' families. You found out about the white car from a press release? Yes. Yes. Did they send you the press release? No. A Moscow police spokesperson has forwarded to NBC News a copy of the email press release about the Hyundai, sent to the family's attorney. Approximately 30 minutes before the police made it public on Friday, the 30th of December 2022, an FBI SWAT team along with the Pennsylvania State Police arrested a 28-year-old man named Brian Christopher Kaberger in Monroe County, northeastern Pennsylvania, about 2,500 miles away from Moscow, Idaho. Kaberger was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. Brian Christopher Kaberger was a PhD student at Washington State University in Pullman, less than 8 miles west of Moscow. The sole suspect was studying for a doctoral degree in criminology at WSU and had also worked as teaching assistant. It was reported that less than 2 weeks before the murders, faculty members met with him to discuss growing concerns about his behavior, and he was eventually relieved of his duties as a teaching assistant on December 19, a few days before his arrest. The reason that was given was his unsatisfactory performance as a teaching assistant, including his failure to meet the norms of professional behavior in his interactions with the faculty. So how was he caught? After the investigators received the intel about the Hyundai Elantra, authorities in Pullman started to investigate a white Elantra belonging to Kaber, who had traveled home in it with his father to Pennsylvania for the holidays. The authorities started to zero in on Kaber because his driver's license information and photograph matched the description given by one of the surviving roommates. According to court documents, the investigators discovered that Kaberger got new license plates on November 18, 5 days after the quadruple homicide. They also looked into cell phone data that showed that Kaberger's phone stopped connecting to the network in Pullman around 2:47 a.m. on November 13 before showing up again around 4:48 a.m. near Blaine, Idaho, which is south of Moscow. The cell phone data also showed that his phone used a cell tower near the victim's residence around 9:00 a.m. on November 13, roughly 5 hours after the killings. They went on to find out that his phone had used the cell phone tower that was closest to the victim's apartment at least 12 times between June and November 13 of 2022. The evidence that helped the investigators to truly pin Kerr to the crime was the DNA found on the leather knife sheath that was on Madison's bed, as well as trash that was obtained from the Kaber family residence. Before the arrest, investigators kept an eye on Kaber outside of his parents' Pennsylvania home. They reported that he was seen multiple times wearing surgical gloves and observed putting away trash bags not inside his own garbage can but in that of a neighbor. The authorities tested the sheath left behind at the apartment and the trash for DNA samples at the Idaho State Labs and found a match in both items with a profile of a male familial connection to Kaberger, reportedly excluding 99.9998% of the male population, that is. According to court documents at the time of his arrest, authorities said that they found Kerr in the kitchen wearing examination gloves and putting trash into separate Ziploc bags. The authorities reported that Kaber had completely cleaned out his car, but they searched the house where he was arrested and found a knife, a pistol, and a black face mask, as well as ID cards inside a glove inside a box. Since the arrest, Kaberger agreed to be extradited to Idaho over a year ago to face trial for the charges leveled against him. He made his first appearance in court at the Lada County Courthouse in Moscow, Idaho on January 5, 2023. In May of 2023, a grand jury indicted him of the murder and burglary charges, which led to him being arraigned. Kaberger refused to enter a guilty or not guilty plea to the charges, though, so the judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, and on June 26, 2023, the prosecutors announced that they will be seeking the death penalty if he is found guilty of the charges. The court has rejected filings from Kaberger's defense counsel to dismiss the indictment, and he will stand trial. A trial was first set for October 2023, but it has been shifted a few times. The trial is now expected to commence in June of 2025, much to the frustration of the families of the victims for murder suspect Brian Kaberger. All the parties have agreed to a June 2025 trial date. And this, of course, has been the family's been very frustrated. It's been a year and a half and still no trial dates. It's gone back and forth, and now here we go. During this hearing going on right now, a trial date has been set. All right, let's go into court for that moment there in the Lada County Courthouse. Thank you, Judge, Your Honor. First, I know the court has listed this as taking place in Lada County. We haven't been heard on our change of venue yet. That's to come, so I don't want anybody thinking I'm agreeing to Lada County at all. The June of 2025, that's the time frame that we have been working towards. I am hopeful that we can come in there. We're working towards that date. I think it's reasonable to set that date, as the court's aware mitigation is something that takes a significant amount of time. We've had that underway since the day we took this case. We continue to work that very hard. I spoke with our mitigation expert last night about this date, and there's a lot of work yet to be done, but we're still working towards that, so I think it's reasonable to set that. I just want the court to know that that's not finished at this point. That's very much ongoing, and new things are coming out that we need to follow up. But with that said, I think it's reasonable to go ahead and pick the June of 2025 as a trial date at this time. Thank you. And by the way, I think you understand that, all counsel understand that, but this is a 3-month trial, so I was calculating 2 weeks to set the jury, then 8 weeks of trial, and then 2 weeks for mitigation and census. And I mean, that's a guess, but I think it's enough time for all of those things to take care of, and obviously the last 2 weeks would only be if Mr. Kaberger was convicted. Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Your Honor. I do want to bring up a couple of issues I have with some of the deadlines. I looked this over. Our team has talked about it. I've gone over this with Mr. Kaberger. I do have a couple of concerns about the deadlines, and I'll just bring those up to the court's consideration as far as motions challenging the death penalty, and that's in right under me. All right, there you have it. June 2025 is the trial date. In the aftermath of the murders, the owner of the property where the sad incident took place donated the house to the University of Idaho. The house was demolished on December 28, 2023. The university has also announced plans to build a memorial garden on campus in honor of the 4 slain students. According to a spokesperson, the student community will be carried along in both the plans for a memorial garden and the decision on what will be done with the site where the event occurred. The university also awarded posthumous degrees to the 4 victims on May 13, 2023. Reports say that a consciousness of personal security increased among the students at the University of Idaho following the attack, and that a lot of the students feel that the incident will stick with them forever. The families of 3 of the victims, Xana, Ethan and Madison, have set up scholarships in their honor. One of them is the Ethan Smile Foundation, which was established by the family of Ethan Chapin and is now benefiting dozens of high school students. Story 3: he was a father and husband and was meant to love and care for the lives of those handed to him, but he turned out to be the same person who ended their lives. Why would a family man give in to the inner demons constantly whispering to him to end the lives of those he called family? On that day, nothing could stop this man from brutally murdering the people he loved the most, not their cries, not the fear and terror that filled their eyes as he murdered them. Nothing. He had already made up his mind. This is another story reminding us that a seemingly ordinary person can have the darkest motives brooding in their hearts, and even the most unsuspecting person can be a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Our love and respect goes out to all those who knew and loved the victims of the Oda family and all those affected by this case. On March 10, 2024, a tragic event happened in a quiet neighborhood in Honolulu called Mano Paris Oda. A 46-year-old man took the life of his family. He stabbed his wife Naoko Oda and their 3 kids, Sakuradu Oda, their 17-year-old daughter, 12-year-old Arita, and 10-year-old Nana Oda, and then proceeded to kill himself as well. Oda used a kitchen knife to fatally stab himself and his family and ended up single-handedly wiping out the entire Mano family. The police in Honolulu took charge of investigating this sad and heartbreaking event, and they concluded that this mass killing was the second deadliest murder in Honolulu in almost 25 years. Oda, the head of the family, was a chiropractor, which means he helped people with their backs and necks. He had an office near a big shopping center called Alam Moana Center. If you looked at his Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media pages, you would think he was a peaceful and calm person, but in 1997, when he was a teenager growing up on the beautiful island of Kauai, he meddled in a little bit of crime. He entered someone's private property without permission and he got in trouble for it, but he presumably learned his lesson and the crime was erased from his record after he avoided other forms of trouble. It was a Sunday morning when the police received a distress call. The caller reported hearing screams coming from a house on Wala Place. The police rushed to the scene, arriving at the Oda family's home at 36:22 Wallow Place. It was early in the morning at 8:34 a.m. When they got there, they couldn't find the person who made the call. The officers walked up to the house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. They listened carefully, but there was no sound of screaming. They even asked a neighbor if they had heard anything, but the neighbor said they hadn't heard a thing. Everything seemed quiet and normal. So they felt it could have been a false emergency. Little did they know something was very wrong. Real. A father accused of murdering his 3 children and wife and then turning the knife on himself. The police officer wanted to get some more information, so they tried to call the 911 caller back, but there was a problem. The caller's phone number was from another country and the police system couldn't call it back. This was a limitation that the police were working to fix, but it meant they couldn't follow up with the caller right away. So the officers did the next best thing. They carefully searched the area around the Oda family's home looking for any signs of trouble. They made notes about what they saw and then they left the scene. It was almost 9 a.m. by the time they finished up and headed back to their patrol car. Just 15 minutes after the police left the Oda family's home, the 911 caller phoned again. This time an officer hurried back to the house in Mano. When they arrived, they found the caller standing outside waiting for them. The caller was a woman who rented a room from the Oda family, and she was clearly very troubled. Her hands were shaking and her face was pale. She had seen something that had left her deeply disturbed, and she needed the police to know about it. The tenant took a deep breath and with her voice shaking, she began to tell them what she had heard. She had been in her room fast asleep when she was woken up immediately by screams. It was sometime between 2 and 2:30 at 3:00 in the morning. And the screams were loud and terrifying. She froze, her heart racing as the screams grew louder and closer. The screams were coming from right outside her door. She quickly locked herself in, too afraid to open the door, and then she saw something that terribly frightened her. She saw blood seeping under her door, spreading across the floor like a dark stain. She felt trapped, too scared to come out. She waited until she couldn't wait any more, then climbed out of her window. The police officers rushed to the scene. She told them about immediately. They reached the front door, but it was Locked, refusing to open up despite their efforts. They looked through the window and saw a person lying motionless. Unresponsive to their calls, the officers knew they had to act fast. They made their way to the back door, their guns drawn, and cautiously entered the house. What they saw was gruesome. Oda lay in the hallway, his body covered in stab wounds, surrounded by a pool of blood. He was dead, and the officers knew that. They had walked into a crime scene. They were able to see an unresponsive person through the window. They called out to the person but received no answer. Officers entered through the back door and found the unresponsive male laying in blood in the hallway. He had stab wounds to the chest and was deceased. He was later identified as the suspect, 46-year-old Paris Oda. The police went into the house room by room. They were looking for clues. That was when the police found Naoko Sakurako, Orion, and Nana murdered. The police saw that they had tried to fight back and that they had cuts on their hands and wrists. The police felt that they must have died because of their injuries. They probably died a few hours after it happened. The police also concluded that the incident took place around 2 or 2:30 in the morning. According to the tenant's statement, it was around that time that she heard screams and tried to call the police. It turned out that Oda had been struggling with financial problems for a long time. In 2023 he was in deep trouble, and in February 2024 he confessed to his wife that he hadn't paid taxes in years. He told his relatives that he would rather die than go to prison for not paying taxes. He even said that he wanted to kill his family and burn down their house. Oda had texted his wife in February saying they needed a plan to do it and take their children with them because he believed no one could take better care of them than himself. This will be discussed later in this video, so stay tuned. Oda also attempted to buy a gun in March, but that didn't work out for him. Despite all these warning signs, Oda was said to have never been violent before, but you never know the real intentions of a man who feels inadequate and useless to his family, and on that fateful morning something went terribly wrong. Reflecting his original intentions, on a Friday afternoon, Lt. Dinas from the Honolulu Police Department stood in front of a crowd of reporters. She was there to share some important information about the investigation the police had been working on. She stated that after they started looking into the life of Oda, they found out that he was struggling with money problems. Towards the end of 2023, Oda had been having trouble paying his bills on time. He was behind on his car payments, tuition and loan payments. He confided in a family member saying that he felt responsible for fixing the problem. He also shared his worries with his wife, and together they tried to make some changes to get back on track, but unfortunately their financial struggles continued. As the months went by, Oda tried to sell a second property he owned in IA with the help of a real estate agent, but even that didn't seem to help. In February he revealed to his wife that he hadn't paid taxes in years. His chiropractor business was also struggling, and he didn't have enough patience to keep up with the bills to make ends meet. He even started driving for Uber. In February, Paris' concerns increased, and he told his wife that he had not paid taxes for years. He was not getting enough patience at his chiropractor business, and he started to work as an Uber driver. The police investigation uncovered all of these details, and Lieutenant Thomas shared them with the public that Friday afternoon. Remember that earlier it was stated that in the middle of February Oda sent a text message to his wife that they needed to plan to do it, and it was something that he thought would change the course of their lives. He told her they needed to make a plan they had discussed before, a plan to end their lives and the lives of their children. Oda was at a breaking point. He felt like he couldn't go on, and he believed that no one else could take care of their children as well as he could. He thought that if he and his wife were gone, their children would be lost. To his wife, Naoko tried to be positive and encouraging. She suggested they start fresh in Japan where her parents lived, but Oda was too exhausted, too drained. He felt like he had nothing left to give. After that he started to pull away, becoming quiet and distant. This was a turning point in their story, a moment When the struggles they had faced for so long became even more overwhelming, the police would later find this text message, and it would become a crucial part of their investigation into what happened next. In the middle of February, Paris texted his wife that they needed to plan to do it. He said he could not take it anymore, and he told her that their children needed to come with them because no one could take better care of them than he could. Naoko tried to be optimistic and encouraging with Paris. She suggested that they move to Japan with her parents as March arrived. The financial worries grew. Tax season was approaching and he felt overwhelmed. He discussed selling their home in Mano with a realtor, hoping to find a way out of his financial struggles, but Oda's anxiety and fear took a dark turn. It was at this point that he confided in relatives that he would rather die than face the shame of going to jail for unpaid taxes. In a desperate and alarming statement, he also threatened to harm his own family and burn their house to the ground. Paris's financial distress heightened in March as the tax season approached. He told relatives that he would rather die before going to jail for unpaid taxes. At that time, he also said that he would kill his family and burn the house down. It was around the same time that Oda reached out to someone with a chilling request. He wanted a gun, but the person never responded. Hawaii News Now talked to Annette Oda, the mother of Paris. Oda Annette said that her son grew up on the beautiful island of Kauai and that the family is struggling to understand what could have happened. When the interviewers asked Annette if she saw any signs that something was wrong, she didn't want to talk about it. This is a very sad story after all, and the family is trying to make sense of it as family searched for answers. Oda's chiropractic office in the Pan Am building was closed. A former patient, Martha Randolph, was shocked by the news that he had harmed his family. She said that there was absolutely no sign and no indication that Oda was going through such a dark time, not even one word out of place. She added that she trusted him completely, but he could have twisted her head off. She had no doubt whatsoever that she was in good hands, but now is terrified to find out he could do such evil to his own family. A neighbor and friend of the family had some fond memories to share with Hawaii News Now. He said that Naoko would sometimes help out at her husband's chiropractic clinic and that the family was very excited about Sakurako's upcoming graduation from Ayani School. They were even exploring college options for her both in Hawaii and on the mainland. Sakurako had big dreams as she wanted to become a nurse and a great cook. The mother and daughter duo were quite the team. In 2019 they even ran the Hapalaya Marathon together, finishing just 3 places apart on a certain Monday. Hawaii News Now spoke to many people in the neighborhood where the tragic event happened. Most of them didn't know the family very well, but they were all deeply affected by what happened. One woman was so sad that she cried all day. The neighbors couldn't understand how such a terrible thing could happen. Irvin Yoshino, one of the Oda family's neighbors, expressed how tragic the entire situation is and the fact that everybody is feeling it because it feels like part of their own family is gone. Tragic. Everybody's feeling it and everybody's just, it feels like part of your family. We go on walks, we go down there and we see the kids riding their bikes, skateboard. Another person who talked to Hawaii News Now said he had a feeling something was wrong. He stated that something didn't feel right and that he could see something was off. According to him, they seemed sad. One person says he sensed something was wrong, just didn't feel right. Seeing the kids walk past us throughout the week making eye contact, I could see something in their eyes, like they were sad, couldn't figure it out. And then seeing this on the news after the unfortunate event, the schools where the victims studied wanted to help their students and staff deal with their emotions. The 3 schools on the island of Oahu offered counselors to support those who were grieving. Alani School, where Sakurako was a student, sent an email to parents on Sunday night. They invited students, teachers and staff to come together and share their feelings. They even had a special early morning chapel service. Orion, the 6th grader, attended Sikh's charter school in Nuanu. The school's leader reached out to parents to let them know that crisis Counselors were available to help their children work through their grief. Nana, the youngest, attended Mono Elementary School. The Department of Education sent a letter to parents offering a crisis intervention team to support the school community. All three schools decided to help their students and staff deal with the loss of their friends, students and classmates. They wanted to make sure everyone had someone to talk to and a safe place to express their feelings. Britt Young, a therapist who helps families, said that parents need to talk to their children about what happened, but they should explain it in a way that's appropriate for their child's age. Britt said that younger children, like those in elementary and middle school, might feel scared and worried. They might think that if a person could hurt their own children, someone could hurt them too. Parents can help their children feel better by reassuring them and talking with them. With older children like teenagers and young adults, parents can have a more open and honest conversation. Britt suggested letting them ask questions and answering them in a thoughtful way. This can help them understand and process their feelings. Just being present and offering comfort can make a big difference, Britt said. Parents can help their children feel safe and supported by talking to them in a way that works best for their age and needs. By listening and offering comfort, parents can help their children heal and feel better. When Rakota attended Yolani School, counselors went to all of her classes today to assist students and teachers who were struggling with the news. She was a senior set to graduate this summer. The 12-year-old Oreo Noda was a 6th grader at Sikh's Charter School in Nanu. A very close-knit group of students and parents. Their counselors also offered support to them, and the youngest, Nana Oda, attended Mono Elementary School. The DO notified parents that a crisis intervention team was there for anyone who needs help because the victims range in age and grade. Counselors handle it differently at the various campuses. It's important to note that the adults will also be affected. The teachers and faculty intense reaction of like anger perhaps and grief for perhaps a family you didn't even know. I'm so angry this could happen. Who would do that? So it's not like we're adults and we just handle it completely. We process it without going to that angry place. It's normal to feel angry. It's normal to wonder who would do this for children struggling with this. Young suggest talking to the younger children without too many details, but also listening and letting them ask questions, even if it's questions you don't have answers to. With the teens, an open dialogue and sometimes just comfort can be helpful. On a Tuesday evening, the Wiki community came together to mourn the loss of the lives that were taken too soon. Hundreds of people gathered on the lawn of the Wiki Shell to remember and honor the Oda children. Sakurako, Orion and Nana, the organizers of the vigil, wanted to create a space where those who knew the Oda family could come together, share their grief, and support one another. It was a chance for classmates, friends, teammates and teachers to also pay tribute to the three siblings who they knew as friends and classmates. As the evening came in WYK, the crowd gathered on the lawn to share their pains and sorrow and their memories of the Oda children. It was an emotional evening. People were crying and hugging those who needed comfort, and stories of the impact that Sakurako, Orion and Nana had on those around them were being shared. Even after more than 2 weeks since the tragedy, many people were still struggling to accept what happened. Matilda Tamizi, who played soccer with Nana, said that it's terribly hard for her to believe what happened. She explained that even small things like seeing a soccer field can bring back sad memories and make her cry again. A GoFundMe page has been set up to raise money for the Oda family's funeral expenses. Terreras Manzano, Oda's eldest daughter from a previous relationship, and her mother Analine are organizing the effort. They hope to raise $100,000 to cover funeral and legal expenses. The community is coming together to support the Oda family in any way they can. Story 4. On April 18 and 19, 2020, Gabriel Wortman went on a deadly rampage across Nova Scotia, leaving a trail of heartbreak and destruction in his wake. Over the course of 13 hours, Wortman disguised in a fake police uniform and driving a replica RCMP cruiser, attacked 16 different locations, killing 22 people and injuring 3 others. The tragedy ended when he was shot by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police RCMP in Anfield. In the aftermath, questions arose regarding why the police didn't use the Alert Ready system to warn the public, and why previous reports of Wortman's violent behavior were seemingly ignored. An inquiry was launched to investigate the police response as families and communities struggled to make sense of the senseless violence that had completely destroyed their lives. The Nova Scotia attacks stand as the deadliest shooting spree in Canadian history, surpassing the tragic 1989 ALOL Polytechnique massacre in Montreal. Our love and respect goes out to all those who knew and the victims and all those affected by this case. The horrifying events began in the quiet beachside community of Portague, where Wortman attacked his partner, set their cottage on fire and forcefully put her in his replica RCMP cruiser. Miraculously, his partner managed to escape and hide in the woods until morning, but Wortman was just getting started. From 10:01 p.m. Portague residents began calling 911 to report gunshots and several fires. The first call came from the wife of a victim who was shot and killed while trying to protect her 2 sons by barricading them in a bedroom. Wortman tried to set the house on fire, but the boys managed to escape. It is believed Wortman targeted the father first, as he was afraid he could stop him since he had rifles. Around 10:05 p.m. Wortman returned to his burning house and killed a neighbor who had mistaken him for an RCMP officer responding to the fire. Her children took in the 2 boys from the first house and together they hid for hours, staying on the phone with 911 until they were rescued. At 10:10 p.m. 2 of Wortman's neighbors drove to his house to check the fire. While calling 911, they passed the house where Wortman had killed another couple. Noticing what seemed to be a police car with its lights off after confirming Wortman's house was on fire, they saw the same car setting another house on fire. When they pulled alongside, Wortman fired at them and hit the driver in the shoulder, and the 2 neighbors fled the scene. When the first 3 RCMP officers arrived on the scene at 10:26 p.m., they walked through the neighborhood and soon found some of the victims. Many had died while trying to escape the flames or help others. The police, overwhelmed by the scene, reported that they couldn't locate the shooter and described the situation as horrendous. They soon found the neighbors Wortman had shot, who identified him and mentioned he was heading towards the beach in a replica police vehicle, a detail also confirmed by multiple 911 calls. At 11:32 p.m. the RCMP tweeted about a firearms complaint, urging Portague residents to stay inside and lock their doors. They set up a 2 kilometers search perimeter, but Wortman had already left the area at around 10:45 p.m. Driving through a dirt road by a blueberry field that wasn't blocked off, he spent the night parked behind a welding shop in Deer, about 26 kilometers east of Portague, where he left police equipment and gun-related items. Despite the chaos, residents reported seeing little to no law enforcement presence at first, even as they called 911 to report ongoing fires and gunshots. By 1 a.m. the RCMP had passed around messages to police agencies across Nova Scotia identifying Wortman as a suspect, armed and dangerous, and associated with an old white police car. At 5:43 a.m. Wortman left a bear and drove north on Highway 4 to a house on Hunter Road in Wentworth. Arriving around 6:30 a.m. he killed the 2 residents and their dogs and stayed at the house for about 3 hours. Around that time, police found Wortman's partner in Portague. She had fled to a neighbor's house to call 911 after Wortman smashed her phone. Barefoot and having hidden outdoors for much of the night, she confirmed he was pretending to be a police officer and provided a photo of his replica police vehicle, a Bow Alert. With this information was issued at 8 a.m. warning that Wortman could be anywhere in Nova Scotia. The RCMP publicly announced they were dealing with an active shooter in Portic at 8:02 a.m. and Wortman was officially identified as the suspect at 8:54 a.m. Wortman eventually set the house he was in on fire. As he left, he killed a neighbor who saw the fire and tried to help. At 9:23 a.m. he began driving south on Highway 4 toward Portic, and at 9:35 a.m. he killed another victim walking along the road in Wentworth Valley. Around 9:45 a.m. Wortman arrived at another house in Glenholm, but the residents, recognizing him, refused to let him in. One resident armed himself with a shotgun to catch Wortman trying to trick them. Wortman pretended to be a police officer, but the resident called the police, causing Wortman to leave. By 9:48 a.m. he was seen near a campground in Glenholm. Before 10 a.m. in Dber, Wortman stopped random cars a few hundred meters apart and killed the drivers and passengers of both vehicles he was seen passing through Dber and Onslow. By 10:08 a.m. at 10:17 a.m. the RCMP warned the public for the first time via Twitter that Wortman was pretending to be a police officer and shared a photo of his vehicle at the Onslow Belmont Fire Hall, which had been set up as a shelter for victims from Portic. Two RCMP officers accidentally opened fire on an emergency management officer thinking he was Wortman. They missed and continued their search without checking on the people at the fire hall. Wortman was caught on surveillance video passing through Truro around 10:20 a.m. and at 10:25 a.m. he stopped briefly at Millbrook First Nation to change his jacket for a reflective vest. Before 10:49 a.m. Wortman encountered RCMP officer Chad Morrison at the intersection of Route 2 and Route 224 in Shubenacadie. Wortman shot into Morrison's cruiser and injured him. Morrison managed to escape and hide at an empty paramedic station, where he was later found and taken to the hospital. Wortman then drove less than 500 m south to the junction with Route 224, where he collided head-on with RCMP officer Heidi Stevenson, who was driving north to meet Morrison. In the confrontation, Wortman shot and killed Stevenson. He then stole her sidearm and ammunition and set both vehicles on fire. Wortman also shot and killed a nearby motorist who had stopped to help Stevenson and drove off. The victim's silver Ford Escape SUV, police announced the vehicle change at 11:06 a.m. shortly after Wortman killed a woman he knew at her Shubenacadie home, changed his clothes again and stole her Mazda 3 vehicle. By 11:24 a.m. he was seen continuing south along Highway 102 through Milford. After over 13 hours of pursuit, Wortman stopped to refuel at the Irving Big Stop service area in Enfield, 92 kilometers south of Portic and 40 kilometers north of Halifax. At 11:26 a.m. two RCMP officers arrived. One officer drew his firearm as he left the vehicle, aiming at Wortman inside the car. Wortman raised Stevenson's sidearm to his head and fired, and the officers then fatally shot him. His death was confirmed by police at 11:40 a.m. According to a partially redacted document, Wortman's partner said he had been on his way to Halifax to get someone before he was killed, which led the officers to catch him. Wortman killed 22 people, including police officer Heidi Stevenson, police officer Chad Morrison, whom Wortman also shot, survived, as did the man in Portic who first reported Wortman's use of a police car. 13 of the dead were found in Portic, 4 in Wentworth, 2 in Debert and 3 in Shubenacadie. 8 victims were found in the remains of structure fires. Wortman also killed 2 dogs and injured 2 others, according to RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky. Some of Wortman's first victims were closely connected to him, but over time his attacks became more random. One of the victims in Wentworth had previously gone hunting with Wortman, while another victim had a property in Portic at which Wortman and his uncle had a fight. 51-year-old Gabriel Wortman was a denturist who operated 2 clinics in Halifax and Dartmouth and owned real estate in Halifax, Dartmouth and Portic. His estate, valued at $2.1 million Canadian dollars, included 6 properties and 3 corporations. Wortman usually lived above his Dartmouth clinic but also had a cottage in Portick since 2004. He had a close friendship and business association with a former Fredericton lawyer who died in November 2009, which left him all his possessions, including one of the rifles used in the attacks. Wortman did not have a possession and acquisition license, which would have been required to legally possess the rifle after the attacks. Complaints from the public led to the removal of the decorative signs on Wortman's denture clinic on Portland Street in Dartmouth, which showed a large smile and a set of dentures. Halifax Regional Police took down the signs and the building was destroyed in January 2022. Wortman had a previous conviction for assault in 2002, which resulted in 9 months of probation, during which he was prohibited from possessing weapons and ordered to undergo anger management counseling. He was also involved in 2 civil lawsuits over property disputes. In 2004, Wortman offered to help a friend in financial trouble who was about to lose his house, but he then anonymously took ownership of the house, evicted the man, and sold the property. In 2015, Wortman's uncle lent him a house in Portick while selling his Edmonton condominium. Wortman refused to return the property, claiming he was owed money. The uncle eventually sold it, and one of the buyers later became a victim in the killings. Witnesses described Gabriel Wortman as paranoid, manipulative, and controlling. According to his uncle, Wortman and his mother suffered abuse from his father, who was known for being a chronic petty thief, able to manipulate the system to avoid financial obligations, a trait Wortman may have learned from him. A cousin described Wortman as almost a career criminal who engaged in various illegal activities without getting caught. Neighbors noted Wortman's obsession with his partner and his jealousy. Residents reported suspicions that Wortman was stacking gasoline and propane tanks, and he allegedly boasted about having lime and muriatic acid to dispose of bodies. Neighbors also mentioned his struggles with alcohol and how his denturous business was affected by the pandemic, which was the reason for the shutdown of non-essential services in Nova Scotia. According to his partner, Wortman had been consumed by fear and anxiety about the pandemic for weeks before the attacks. He believed he was going to die and expressed concerns that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would take control of money, which led him to make large withdrawals from his bank accounts. But there's a twist in his story. According to his yearbook, Gabriel Wortman actually wanted to be a police officer, but his partner revealed to police after the attacks that Wortman started hating them and believed he was better than them. Despite this, he had a hobby of collecting police souvenirs and restoring old police cruisers. At the time of the attacks, he owned 4 such cruisers, 2 of which were found burned at his Portipic property, another at his Halifax property, and he initially used the 4th during the rampage. One person described Wortman's home as a shrine dedicated to the RCMP, and he kept 2 of the vehicles behind his dental clinic. In 2017 or 2018, Wortman approached a businessman in DEP about buying a decommissioned RCMP cruiser, claiming to be a retired officer wanting to use it to deceive thieves by parking it outside his home. He didn't proceed with the purchase due to its cost. Witnesses also reported that Wortman had a tendency to dress in a police uniform and role play. Despite his fascination with law enforcement, police were called about Wortman's troubling behavior on multiple occasions. In 2001, he was reported to have assaulted a 15-year-old boy. In June 2010, Halifax Regional Police investigated Gabriel Wortman for threatening his parents, but no official action was taken as there wasn't enough evidence. In May 2011, Truro police received a concerning email tip from an anonymous source about Wortman possessing guns and expressing a desire to harm a police officer. The tip also mentioned his stress and mental health issues, claiming he always kept the handgun nearby. This information was transferred to the Nova Scotia RCMP, though it's unclear what actions they took, and the tip was eventually purged. From their records, as per protocol, a former neighbor in Portac reported Wortman to the RCMP in the summer of 2013 for allegedly assaulting his spouse and possessing illegal firearms. However, since the spouse did not file a complaint, the RCMP did not pursue further action. The neighbor eventually left Port Topic due to Wortman's escalating aggression towards his spouse. Following the complaint, the RCMP confirmed they received the neighbor's report but later purged the file from their records. No clear motive has been found for Gabriel Wortman's attacks. The investigation consisted of 25 units of the RCMP with the Halifax Regional Police and the Canada Border Services Agency. The crime scene spanned a distance of at least 50 kilometers with 16 locations, including 5 structure fires, and approximately 500 witnesses identified. A man whom Wortman had considered buying a police car from was warned by police during the incident that he might be a target, but Wortman did not target him during his rampage. The Nova Scotia RCMP Major Crime Unit established a tip hotline to get more information from the public about the attacks. On May 11, the RCMP's Behavioral Analysis Unit began a psychological autopsy on Wortman and conducted extensive interviews with his friends, family, and associates. Their findings showed that Wortman was an injustice collector, a term in criminology describing people who have been through grief and injustices over many years. 5 firearms were recovered from the stolen vehicle Wortman used in Anfield. 4 of these firearms belonged to Wortman: 2 semi-automatic handguns and 2 semi-automatic rifles, one of which was described as a military-style assault rifle. The 5th firearm was police officer Heidi Stevenson's stolen service pistol. Gabriel Wortman's purchase and use of firearms in the Nova Scotia attacks were a very important point in the investigation. The Ruger Mini 14, bought legally from an estate in Canada, had been imported and purchased in Winnipeg before Wortman bought it. Canadian gun policy allows the executive of an estate temporary possession of firearms, including those like the Mini 14, which typically require a possession and acquisition license for legal ownership. Wortman had connections in Maine, where he stole the Glock 23 from a friend for what he claimed was personal protection. Another friend confirmed lending Wortman that within the past few years these firearms were classified as restricted in Canada. Additionally, Wortman had high-capacity magazines banned under Canadian law and equipped his pistols with laser sights. Wortman's use of a police car and uniform allowed him to not get caught for a while owning police vehicles or uniforms is legal in Canada. Impersonating a police officer is a criminal offense. Officials noted that Wortman bought the specific vehicle used in the attacks, a 2017 Ford Taurus, from an auction in fall 2019. It was repainted and police accessories were removed. Wortman was believed to have spent 9 months changing the police vehicle he used during the attacks. The decals used on the vehicle were bought from a supplier without the owner's permission. Financial transactions through PayPal were flagged as suspicious between March 22 and December 5, 2019, and revealed purchases of police gear both in Canada and the US. Additionally, records from the Canada Border Services Agency documented Wortman crossing the Canada-United States border via Woodstock, New Brunswick 15 times within the previous 2 years, with his last return to Canada on March 6. In the weeks leading up to the attacks, Wortman liquidated his bank accounts and withdrew $475,000 Canadian dollars from Brinks. This raised questions and speculation about possible ties to organized crime and whether he may have been a confidential informant for the RCMP. However, the RCMP denied any prior association with Wortman and attributed his actions to paranoia fueled by fears about the pandemic potentially causing Widespread collapse following the attacks. A fireproof safe with hundreds of thousands of dollars was discovered at Wortman's Portic property with a total of $75,000 Canadian dollars taken from the premises on July 27. Court documents were made public and police interviews with witnesses were revealed. These witnesses claimed that Wortman was involved in drug smuggling, alleging that he provided drugs sourced from Maine to residents of Portic and the nearby community of Economy. They also said that Wortman had stockpiles of both firearms and drugs hidden behind fake walls and hidden compartments in his house. One witness went as far as claiming that Wortman possessed 2 crates of grenades bought in the U.S. This allegation gained attention when a lawyer representing victims' families reported the discovery of wooden ammunition cases at a crime scene in Portic, suggesting they could have been used to store grenades in addition to drug smuggling and weapons allegations. Witnesses also described Wortman and a friend traveling to the U.S. to smuggle cigarettes, alcohol and potentially other illegal goods using a sailboat owned by the friend. In response to these revelations, a media coalition, including the Halifax Examiner, appealed to the court to unseal specific amendments to the search warrant. Documents related to the RCMP's investigation into the events of April 18 and 19. The Nova Scotia judge ruled in favor of the media coalition and ordered these amendments to remain unedited. Following these developments, the RCMP issued a detailed statement refuting most of the claims made by witnesses. They claimed that the evidence supporting these allegations came from only a single source among the hundreds interviewed during the investigation. Firstly, Nova Scotia Serious Incident Response Team announced its investigation into 2 separate incidents: the police shooting of Gabriel Wortman and another incident involving RCMP officers who discharged their weapons inside a fire hall in Onslow. This latter incident happened under the belief that they were catching Wortman, though he was not there at the time. By December 17, ST completed its review specifically about Wortman's death, concluding that the actions of the officers involved in his shooting were justified following the tragic events involving Gabriel Wortman in Nova Scotia. There was a tremendous amount of skepticism and questions raised about the police response and the communication methods used to warn the public. Commissioner Brenda Lucki did a thorough review of the RCMP's response to the attacks. One of the most important points under review was the delay in informing the public about Wortman potentially impersonating a police officer, which could have impacted public safety and response efforts. A central issue that came out was the failure to use Alert Ready, Canada's emergency population warning system, to warn residents about the attacks. Instead, the RCMP decided to use social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook for updates. This decision raised concerns because the affected areas had poor cellular internet service and many residents, particularly older people, may not have had access to or been familiar with social media platforms. Relatives of the victims and others argued that the use of Alert Ready could have potentially saved lives by reaching a bigger segment of the population more quickly and effectively. On July 28, 2020, Federal Public Safety Minister Bill Blair announced the establishment of a public inquiry into the April 2020 Nova Scotia mass murders as a result of the public outcry and pressure from victims' families. At first, there had been discussions about a joint review by federal and local authorities, but the scope was expanded to a full public inquiry. After protests and concerns from the community, the independent public inquiry was established to examine the mass casualty incident in Nova Scotia and to find recommendations to increase community safety in the future. The inquiry's mandates included a thorough examination of the RCMP response to the incident and the role gender-based violence may have played in the events. Additionally, the Commission maintains an ongoing webcast to broadcast its public proceedings, making sure that they're transparent and keeping the public informed about the Commission's work on March 30, 2023, the Mass Casualty Commission released its final report, which was highly critical of the RCMP. The report highlighted several key failings, including the RCMP's inability to effectively warn the public about the shooting, inadequate preparation for such crisis, systemic inflexibility, and a lack of accountability within the force. The report made 130 recommendations, more than half of which were directed at the RCMP. These included urging the Federal Public Safety Minister to initiate an independent review of the RCMP. Other important recommendations included better funding for addressing intimate partner violence, recognizing the role of such violence in the lead-up to the attacks, and calling for increased resources and support in this area. It also suggested creating a dedicated organization to support victims, noting that only one officer was assigned to all 21 non-poll victims' families to prevent similar tragedies. The report recommended stricter gun control measures. It also called for a nationalized and revamped alert ready system, which is currently privately operated, to make sure that the public is warned effectively and timely during emergencies. Story 5. Andrea Pa Yates is a woman who had severe mental health issues and struggles, all leading to a tragedy. This event shocked the nation and led to questions about mental health and the law. Our love and respect go out to all those who knew and loved the victims and all those affected by this case. In the early hours of June 20, 2001, Houston, Texas was rocked by a chilling confession. Yates, a 36-year-old mother, admitted to drowning her 5 children, Noah Yates, John Yates, Paul Yates, Luke Yates, and Mary Yates, in their bathtub. This horrific act brought to light the severe mental health issues she had been battling for years, including postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. Yates was born in Houston, Texas on July 3, 1974. She was the youngest of 5 children in a family with a rich immigrant heritage. Her mother, Jutta Karen Kohler, was a German immigrant, and her father, Andrew M. Kennedy, was the son of Irish immigrants. Despite struggling with bulimia and depression during her teenage years, Yates excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of Milby High School in 1982, where she was also the captain of the swim team and an officer in the National Honor Society. Yates embarked on her journey in nursing by completing a pre-N nursing program at the University of Houston and eventually graduating from the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston. Her career as a registered nurse spanned from 1986 to 1994, during which she dedicated herself to her work at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, earning a reputation for her commitment and professionalism, all while silently grappling with her mental health challenges. In the warm summer of 1989, Yates's path crossed with Russell "Rusty" Yates at the picturesque Sunscape Apartments in bustling Houston. Russell, a talented engineer at NASA, quickly formed a deep connection with Yates, leading them to decide to move in together. Shortly thereafter, their bond blossomed, culminating in marriage on April 17, 1993, marking the official start of their journey as husband and wife. As devout evangelical Christians, the Yates family held firm beliefs in the importance of expanding their family through childbirth, a decision that would later carry profound and tragic consequences. Their first child, Noah, entered the world in the chilly month of February 1994, soon after Russell's career took them to sunny Florida, where they settled into a cozy trailer in the town of Seal. However, their time in Florida was brief, prompting a return to Houston and a move into a comfortable GMC motorhome. It was following the birth of their 4th child, the adorable Luke, that Yates's mental health began to show signs of severe deterioration. On June 20, 1999, Russell returned home to find his wife shaking and chewing on her fingers, a clear indication of the turmoil she was experiencing. The following day, Yates's struggles intensified as she attempted to take her own life by overdosing on pills leading to her hospitalization and the prescription of antidepressants. Despite this intervention, Yates's mental state continued to decline, with further suicide attempts and multiple hospitalizations, ultimately culminating in a diagnosis of postpartum psychosis. The struggle with mental illness. Rusty Yates returned home from work to a nightmare. His 5 children had been drowned in the bathtub by their own mother, his wife Andrea. Yates's first psychiatrist, Dr. Eileen Starbranch, strongly advised against having more children, warning that it would likely trigger further psychotic episodes. Despite this, Yates and Russell conceived their 5th child, Mary, shortly after Yates's discharge from the hospital in March 2000. Yates stopped taking her medication and gave birth to Mary 9 months later. For a time she seemed to be coping well, but the death of her father on March 12, 2001 marked the beginning of a severe downward spiral. Yates ceased taking her medication, began mutilating herself, and read the Bible obsessively. Her condition worsened to the point of requiring immediate hospitalization under the care of Dr. Muhammad said. Yates was treated and released multiple times. On May 3, 2001 she reached a near catatonic state and filled the bathtub, initially planning to drown her children but ultimately deciding against it. Her psychiatrist, believing she was suicidal, had her hospitalized once more. Despite the continued treatment, Yates's mental health remained fragile. On June 22, 2001 Yates carried out the unthinkable, drowning her 5 children, Noah, John Paul, Luke and Mary, in the bathtub of their home. This tragic event forced the nation to confront the complexities of mental illness and the adequacy of legal frameworks like the monotone rules and the irresistible impulse test. For sanity, the monotone rule states a person is not responsible for criminal conduct if at the time of such conduct, as a result of mental disease or defect, he lacks substantial capacity to appreciate the criminality, wrongfulness of his conduct, or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law. At the time of the murders, the family was living in the Houston suburb of Clear Lake City. Yates continued under Dr. Muhammad's care until June 20, 2001, when Russell left for work, leaving her alone to watch the children against Dr. Muhammad's instructions to supervise her around the clock. Russell's mother, Dora Yates, was scheduled to arrive an hour later to take over for Yates. In that hour, Yates drowned all 5 children, an act that shook the nation and sparked a profound reckoning with the challenges faced by individuals struggling with severe mental illness. She began her descent into madness by silencing her 3 youngest children, John Paul and Luke, laying their lifeless bodies in her bed. Next, she turned her attention to Mary, drowning her in the tub. The sound of the water was the last thing Mary heard when Noah, the eldest, stumbled upon the horrific scene. He tried to flee, but his mother's grasp was too strong. She dragged him back, drowning him in the same tub where his sister had met her fate. The house was now a scene of unimaginable horror, with the bodies of 4 innocent children lying lifeless. Yates, still holding on to her sanity by a thread, called the police, her voice eerily calm as she requested an officer, but she refused to explain why. In a desperate attempt to complete her twisted plan, Yates called her husband Russell, her voice laced with a sense of urgency, telling him to come home immediately. She then called 911 to report what she'd done. Noah, John Paul, Luke and baby Mary, 7 years to just 6 months old. Her husband Rusty was working at the time he returned to a scene of sheer terror. Little did she know her world was about to come crashing down around her. The sound of sirens pierced the air, and the nightmare that was unfolding would soon be exposed to the world. Yates confessed to drowning her 5 children, Noah, John Paul, Luke and Mary, in the bathtub of their home in Clear Lake City, Texas on June 22, 2000. Before her second trial, she told Dr. Michael Wellner, a forensic psychiatrist, that she waited for Russell to leave for work before filling the bathtub, knowing he would prevent her from harming the children. After the murders, police found the family dog locked up. Russell informed Dr. Michael that it was normally Allowed to roam free, suggesting Yates had caged it to prevent interference. Russell secured George Parnham a family friend as Yates' attorney despite expert testimony agreeing that Yates was psychotic. Texas law required proving she could not discern right from wrong to assert the insanity defense. In March 2002 a jury rejected the insanity defense, found Yates guilty and sentenced her to life imprisonment with eligibility for parole in 40 years. The prosecution had sought the death penalty but the jury refused. Yates' mental health had been fragile for years. Her first psychiatrist Dr. Eileen had strongly advised against having more children, warning that it would likely trigger further psychotic episodes. Despite this, Yates and Russell conceived their fifth child, Mary, shortly after Yates's discharge from the hospital. There was not much to be done about her case as the results remained the same. The treatment she received, however, was ultimately unable to prevent the tragic events that unfolded on that fateful day. On January 6, 2005, a Texas Court of Appeals reversed Yates's convictions. California psychiatrist and prosecution witness Dr. Park Dietz admitted to giving materially false testimony, stating that an episode of Law and Order featured a woman who drowned her children and was acquitted because of insanity. Author Susan Alley, covering the trial, reported that no such episode existed. The appellate court unanimously held that the jury might have been influenced by Dietz's false testimony, necessitating a new trial. Yates again entered a plea of not guilty because of insanity on January 19, 2006. On February 1, 2006, she was granted release on bail on the condition that she be admitted to a mental health treatment facility. After 3 days of deliberations, Yates was found not guilty because of insanity. In July 2006, as defined by the state of Texas, she was subsequently committed to the North Texas State Hospital Vernon campus, where she would receive treatment for her mental illness. Even with a long and documented history of mental illness, including suicide attempts, she was charged and convicted of capital murder, but the verdict was later overturned, and in a subsequent trial she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She testified she believed her children's deaths would save their souls. Andrea Yates was committed to a Texas mental hospital where she remains today, now 52 years old. In January 2007, Yates was moved to the Kerrville State Hospital, a low-security mental facility in Kerrville, Texas. This transfer was seen as a positive step in her recovery, as the Kerrville facility offered a less restrictive environment that would allow her to continue her rehabilitation and potentially reintegrate into society. The case of Andrea Yates has drawn significant public attention and sparked debates about mental illness, the insanity defense, and the treatment of individuals deemed not guilty because of insanity. Although the psychiatric experts for both the prosecution and the defense concurred that Yates was profoundly mentally ill, suffering from one of several psychotic disorders at the time she took the lives of her children, the state of Texas contended that she was, as per the legal definition, cognizant enough to recognize the rightness or wrongness of her actions despite her mental impairment. The prosecution further implied that a desire for spousal revenge was a motivating factor behind the killings, although the defense experts found no evidence to substantiate this assertion. The original jury believed that she was legally aware of her actions, yet they disagreed on the spousal revenge motive. Dr. Muhammad had advised Russell not to leave his wife unattended. However, in the weeks leading up to the drowning, Russell began leaving her alone with the children for brief periods, believing that this would enhance her independence. Despite the instructions from her physicians at a family gathering the weekend preceding the drowning, Russell announced that he had decided to leave Yates alone at home for an hour each morning and evening to prevent her from becoming entirely dependent on him and his mother for her maternal responsibilities. During a broadcast of Larry King Live, Brian Kennedy, a sibling of Yates, revealed that in 2001, while Russell was accompanying Yates to a specialized mental health facility, Russell had remarked to him that all People suffering from depression just needed a swift kick in the pants to feel better. Yates' mother was shocked and alarmed by Russell's proposed approach, noting that Yates wasn't stable enough to care for their children and had almost choked their daughter Mary while trying to force-feed her solid food. Authors Susie Spencer and Susan documented that Dr. Muhammad, a respected medical professional, first learned that Yates wasn't under continuous supervision during a phone conversation with Russell coinciding with the unfolding news of the tragic events. Yates' initial psychiatrist Dr. Eileen was surprised when Yates and Russell expressed a desire to stop her prescribed psychiatric medications to conceive another child despite the doctor's explicit warnings against it. Russell insisted to the media that psychiatrists never informed him that Yates was psychotic or capable of harming their children. He claimed that had he known otherwise they would never have considered having more children. However, Yates confided to her prison psychiatrist Dr. Melissa Ferguson that before their last child she had expressed to Russell her reluctance to have sex due to warnings from Dr. Eileen that she might pose a danger to their children. Despite this, Russell, driven by his religious beliefs promoting procreation, convinced her that she could manage more children. Suzanne underscored Russell's persistent detachment from reality concerning expanding their family. Throughout the trial, Russell maintained his belief that Yates would be found not guilty and fantasized about having more children with her after successful treatment in a mental health facility. He explored options such as surrogate motherhood and adoption to improve their situation before coming to terms with reality. Russell argued that Dr. Muhammad, as a psychiatrist, had a duty to identify and appropriately treat Yates' psychosis. According to Russell, Dr. Muhammad initially declined to continue Yates's prescription of the antipsychotic Hal, which had effectively treated her during her first breakdown in 1999, despite Russell's insistence that Dr. Muhammad review her medical history to consider previous successful treatments. Dr. Muhammad reluctantly prescribed Hald but discontinued it shortly afterward, expressing concerns about potential side effects. Russell testified that despite Yates's condition appearing to worsen just 2 days before the tragic drowning, Dr. Muhammad refused to extend the use of Hald or read her to the hospital. Russell further stated that Yates was discharged from her final hospitalization in May 2001 while still too unwell, mentioning that hospital staff were frustrated and embarrassed due to constraints imposed by their insurance provider Blue Cross Blue Shield. Russell and his family contended that Yates's manifestation of psychotic behavior preceding the tragic events stemmed from a combination of antidepressants prescribed by Dr. Muhammad. They pointed to Dr. from Moradolan's observation that the antidepressant Afixar had added homicidal ideation to its warning label in 2005, suggesting relevance to their argument. Yates had been prescribed 450 mg of Afir, twice the recommended maximum dosage for a full month before the incident. However, Dr. Lucy Pure, defense expert witness, countered that such dosage levels were not uncommon and asserted they did not contribute to Yates' psychotic state. Instead, Dr. Lucy emphasized that Yates's relapse into psychosis was more plausibly linked to the discontinuation of Haldo 2 weeks earlier. Numerous media reports circulated allegations suggesting that Michael Warini, a traveling preacher whom Russell had encountered during his time at Auburn University, might share responsibility for the tragic deaths. However, both Warnke and Russell vehemently denied these claims. Russell clarified that their relationship with Warini was not especially close and did not contribute to Yates's delusions. Warini asserted that his interactions with the Yates family were intended to strengthen their marriage and promote spiritual growth, emphasizing themes of love within Christian teachings. Both men agreed that any purported link between Warnke's teachings and Yates' mental state was a fabricated story created by the media. During her time in prison, Yates disclosed that she had harbored thoughts of harming her children for an extended period lasting approximately 2 years, she expressed a profound belief that her children viewed her as an inadequate mother and conveyed worries regarding her son's developmental progress. According to her discussions with the jail psychiatrist, Yates articulated a deep-seated fear that her children were destined for damnation, as she perceived them to be lacking in righteousness. She lamented that her parenting methods were insufficient to guide them away from what she perceived as an inevitable fate of perishing in the fires of hell, taking the children's lives. What were you thinking that I had to do it? What was the reason you thought to do it the next morning? Because Russell would be at work. In August 2004, Russell initiated divorce proceedings, asserting that he and Yates had not lived together as a married couple since the day of the tragic events. The legal dissolution of their marriage was finalized on March 17, 2005. Subsequently, Russell embarked on a romantic relationship with Laura Arnold, whom he wed on March 25, 2006. Together they celebrated the birth of a son. However, their marital bond encountered challenges, leading to Laura filing for divorce in 2015, ultimately bringing an end to their relationship. Yates's tragic story serves as a stark reminder of the profound impact untreated mental illness can have on individuals, their families, and loved ones everywhere. It underscores the urgent need for society to prioritize mental health awareness, support systems, and effective treatment options with compassion and understanding. In light of the events surrounding Yates, society must adopt a more comprehensive approach to supporting individuals facing severe mental health challenges in the world today. This includes increasing awareness and education, improving access to mental health services, and integrating mental health into healthcare. By addressing these areas comprehensively, we can create a more compassionate and supportive environment where individuals struggling with severe mental health issues receive the care, understanding, and resources they need to thrive. Story: It was a morning of utter horror when an entire family was found strangled to death in the quiet stillness of their own home as the police began to investigate the warning signs that had been ignored for far too long. Every clue seemed to trace back to one person, someone so intimately close to the victims he could have slit a throat without taking a single step forward. Who are these people, you may be wondering? Police in Columbia, Illinois walked into this house of horrors on the morning of May 5, 2009. 31-year-old Cher Coleman was found lifeless in her bed, a rosary wrapped tightly in her hand, in the rooms nearby. Her two young sons, 11-year-old Garrett and 9-year-old Gavin, were also discovered brutally strangled, their bed sheets undisturbed, as if death had crept in while they slept. But who informed the police about this tragedy? It was around 7 in the morning when Detective Justin Barlow received a call that would mark the beginning of a haunting investigation. Chris Coleman was at the gym, said he couldn't get a hold of his wife Sherry. Concerned, Barlow made his way to the Coleman residence for a welfare check. What he found inside would haunt him forever. Sherry bore 3 distinct ligature marks across her neck and a black eye, evidence that she had fought desperately for her life. Her boys, however, had no such signs. Their deaths were swift, too swift. The walls were vandalized with spray-painted messages. One read, "Punished." Another read, "You knew this was coming." One of the boys had even been defaced with paint. "This was a monster," said KTVI reporter Chris Hayes, somebody who would spray paint the walls. Spray paint one of the boys strangle the kids while they slept. It was a monster. It was a picture-perfect family, the kind you'd expect to see smiling in a church bulletin or framed on a mantle. Violent crime wasn't supposed to touch places like Colia, Illinois. That kind of darkness belonged across the river in the city streets of St. Louis, not in this quiet suburban town. That's exactly why Christopher Coleman chose to raise his family there. It felt safe, peaceful. Godly faith had always been the foundation of Chris' life. His parents, Connie and Ron, were co-pastors at Grace Church in nearby Chester, Illinois. Chris himself had a disciplined background. He served in the Marines as a K-9 handler, and it was during a training seminar that he met Cher Weiss, a fellow military police officer in the U.S. Air Force. Their love was swift and intense. A trip to Chicago turned into a wedding, and soon after, they were expecting their first child. Garrett Gavin followed not long after. A tight-knit, loving family was forming. Chris had climbed high, securing a six-figure position as the head of security for internationally renowned televangelist Joyce Meyer. It wasn't long when Chris became Meyer's personal bodyguard. Meyer had known Chris since he was a child. She trusted him. The Colemans were admired, protected, even blessed at least on the surface. But in this world where religion and righteousness were so deeply rooted in lives, danger sometimes hides behind the mask of devotion, and whispers of resentment were already beginning to rise from the shadows. And then one day everything took a turn. In November 2008, the com began to crack. A blackmail via email filled with obscenities and threats was sent not just to Chris Coleman but to Joyce Meyer and her son as well. The message was clear: stop preaching or face deadly consequences. By January 2009, the threats had escalated. Chris approached his neighbor across the street, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow, with something far more personal. A letter had been left inside his mailbox. It demanded the same thing as the email: tell Joyce to stop preaching or Chris's family will die. I will kill them all as they sleep. Sherry was shaken, especially because the note had been delivered while Chris was away in Hawaii with Joyce Meyer. When he returned, he filed a formal police report. Barlow, alarmed, installed a security camera focused squarely on the Coleman mailbox. Officers increased patrols in the neighborhood, but despite every effort, the camera picked up nothing suspicious. No shadowy figure, no anonymous threat. The only footage it captured was heartbreakingly normal: Chris playing catch with his sons Garrett and Gavin in the front yard. 12 hours later, that same home would become a crime scene. The boys, along with their mother, would be found dead, and the threats that seemed to shake the Coleman house became so real it left 3 of its members dead. Chris's mother, Connie, later recalled how the threats deeply frightened Sherry, especially one letter that appeared while Chris was away on a trip to Hawaii with Joyce Meyer. Sherry had begun to fear that whoever was behind the threats was getting closer, too close. On the morning of May 5, Chris left his home on Robert Drive to go out at a gym in South St. Louis County. While at the gym, he called Cher's phone and left a message. He texted her, tried calling again, and when she didn't respond, he reached out to the police. Chris told Barlow he couldn't reach his wife and asked for a welfare check. Barlow met another Columbia officer outside the Coleman home. There they noticed a basement window had been opened. The two men entered, cautiously descending into the dark basement and making their way through the house. What they found was beyond disturbing: spray-painted messages in large red letters to face the walls. I am always watching, you have paid. And in the bedrooms upstairs, the family that once seemed so safe, so protected, was gone. Oh, but did we tell you weeks before the murders? Sherry texted a friend, if something happens to me, Chris did it. And she wasn't guessing. She said he wanted a divorce, that she and the kids were in the way of his job. Turns out she saw it coming all along, but that wouldn't save her. What really sparked curiosity was when police began wondering why was a bodyguard receiving threats on behalf of a famous preacher, and when this question filled the minds of the investigators, all heads turned to Chris Coleman. Moving forward, Chris would be under scrutiny for even the tiniest moves he would make, leading to the revelation of the biggest betrayal in this dream family. But marriage troubles alone wouldn't hold up a murder charge. This is when the investigators came to know about Tara. While Chris Coleman was standing at the gravesite burying his wife Sherry and their 2 young sons, he was secretly texting Tara, a cocktail waitress from a poker room in St. Petersburg, Florida. And Tara wasn't just anyone, she was Sherry's best friend from high school. Detectives seized Chris's computer and uncovered a digital treasure trove of evidence that revealed the full extent of the affair. There were explicit photos and videos too provocative to share exchanged between Chris and Tara, revealing a steamy hidden relationship beyond the intimate texts Chris had saved personal. Details about Tara, her measurements, her ring size, and even the name they had planned for a baby girl Zoe. Chris was officially supposed to be guarding the world-famous televangelist Joyce Meyer while on a trip to Hawaii. Instead, he was caught on camera with Tara in a hotel room, betraying not just his wife and family but his entire world. When confronted, Chris's father, Pastor Ron Coleman, offered an explanation. Tara was just meeting a need that Sherry at the time wasn't taking care of. He said, "Every man has desires, and if a wife doesn't respect you, you're going to find respect someplace else." When pressed if Sherry was a bad wife, Ron responded that just at that short brief time she had stepped back from doing her job as a wife, but the police weren't buying his excuses. As they dug deeper, they uncovered something way more disturbing. Those emails that had terrified Chris's family were sent from his own computer. The same man crying at his family's funeral was living a double life, and it wasn't looking good. Then came more clues along the route Chris usually took to the gym right near the Jefferson Barracks Bridge. Investigators found evidence, and when they checked his phone data, something didn't add up. On the morning of May 5th, instead of going straight home like he normally would, Chris took a weird roundabout route. It all pointed to one thing: Chris wasn't just a grieving husband and dad. Police were starting to believe he was the one behind the murders. Just a few days later, Major Jeff Connor, who led the investigation, came out and said it he believed they knew who the killer was. A critical moment came after a conference call with renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bowden concluded Sherry and her children were almost certainly killed before Chris left the house that morning. This timeline was crucial. It meant Chris was likely home when the murders happened. Chris said that when Sherry didn't answer his calls, he asked his neighbor, off-duty Police Sergeant Justin Barlow, to check on the family. Surveillance footage shows Barlow entering the Coleman house at 6:51 a.m. where he found the bodies and the chilling spray-painted messages on the walls. Chris returned home 5 minutes later, pulling into the driveway at 6:56 a.m. just seconds before the first officers arrived. But what shocked police even more was Chris's reaction when they told him his wife and children were dead. He didn't ask how they died. He didn't try to see the bodies. The evidence indicates Chris did not make any attempt to go up those stairs. Night V reporter Chris Hayes said officers thought they'd have to restrain him from seeing his dead family, but he didn't try. He didn't ask how were they killed. He just sat on the front lawn with his head in his hands. Chris's father, Ron Coleman, recalled the awful morning. By the time he got there, Chris was sitting outside on the driveway, and then they took him into an ambulance. Ron went in and sat with him. It was a horrible morning, as Ron said, but there were other strange signs. Someone noticed scratches on Chris's arm. He looked at them and started punching the gurney inside the ambulance. Despite these suspicious behaviors and mounting evidence, Ron Coleman remained convinced his son was innocent. Is there any way that there's a part of Chris that you don't know that could have been capable of this? Not in my view. You couldn't put something around your kid's throat unless you're a monster. There's no way his son did this, he insisted. But the police were growing increasingly sure that Chris Coleman's role in the murders was far darker than anyone wanted to believe. Just hours after the grim discovery of Cher Coleman and her two sons, police brought Chris Coleman into the interrogation room. I set my alarm clock for 5:30 and used my phone for my alarm clock, and I got up at 5:30, went in the bathroom, put these clothes here on, and went to the bathroom, and basically got in the truck and left, and I drove off. I got to where I was at and I called Cher to wake her up, get her going, and she didn't answer, of course, so I went on to the gym, to the old gym over by Ronnie's Plaza in South County, and started working out. I texted her at some point. I might have even called. I could probably look at my phone if you want me to. Did you guys have a home phone number too, or just cell phones? No, we just use cell phone, so I texted her and then she still didn't respond, and probably now it had to have been well after 6:00 sometime when I texted her or called her. I'm sure it's still on her phone the time it was, and she didn't respond, and it's not like her because the kids should have been up and stuff or getting up and going by then, I believe, and so I called her again on the way back or when I was getting ready to leave, and she didn't respond again. Detectives started by asking about the night before. Did they have an argument? Chris insisted everything was fine, even said Sherry slept on his arms at the couch that evening. He seemed certain nothing was wrong, but the officers pushed deeper. They pointed out that neighbors had reported hearing a fight and asked why anyone would say that if it wasn't true. Chris denied any argument, insisting he was being honest. When questioned about whether he'd gone to bed at the same time as Sherry, he said yes, describing the usual bedtime routine: brushing his teeth, locking the doors, everything was normal. Come on, Chris, help me out with this. I'm telling you, I've already told you. I've told everybody. I told the guy in the ambulance. I told you. I told him. The more we go back like this, the more it makes me think that there maybe even isn't a good explanation for it. I mean, we need to know what happened. We can't keep going on this. It didn't, you know, she was alive when I left. We know that's not true, and there's nothing we can do about changing that. If we know she wasn't alive when you left this morning, there's got to be an explanation. Now is the time to tell us. Now is the time to get this out of me. I don't know what else to tell you. Yes, you do know. You have to tell me the truth, Chris. I'm telling you the truth. Then, while the detectives were out of the room, Chris received a text from his father asking if he needed a lawyer. This moment hinted at the rising tension back in the room. Detectives probed about anyone else in Chris's life, any romantic involvement. Chris mentioned a woman named Tara from Florida, calling her just a friend and someone to talk to, downplaying what was really an affair. They asked about Sherry that morning. Did she seem okay when he left for the gym? Chris said yes, but little did he know the evidence, including forensic experts' analysis, showed Sherry and the kids were already dead by then. And you know what, for right now I'm just going to have a seat there. I'm not sure there's anything I want to do, but well, here's another water if you need it. Okay, I mean, obviously, so I got to go over your mind. All right, it's just because we're talking to you, and we're talking to you a lot. Okay, I'll tell you what, from the beginning. Let's just start off from when he got up this morning until the time you pulled up at the house. Detectives challenged him directly, telling Chris that the physical evidence said otherwise. He insisted Sherry was alive, that the kids were alive. The tension grew when asked if he was involved in the deaths. Chris flatly denied it. When asked about anyone else being involved, he said he didn't know. When pressed if he had talked to anyone about arranging her death, he denied it vehemently. The questioning circled back to Tara. How long had you been in a relationship with Chris? Since late November, early December. Where had all the kids been together? Phoenix and Hawaii. Maui. What would he tell his wife when he was gone? He would have just told her that he was working. Was there an affair? Chris initially denied it, then admitted to some conversations that might not have been okay. In Sherry's eyes, the detectives were now piecing together a picture of a man caught between a crumbling marriage and a secret relationship, one with deep complications. And then came a bombshell. The detectives told Chris that Tara was already talking to police in Florida and had shared the very explicit photos and messages Chris had sent her. The interrogation room quieted as the officers made it clear the story of a stranger sneaking in to kill Sherry and the boys just didn't add up. Detectives even pointed out how Chris's writing style matched threatening emails sent to Sherry. They found evidence that the paint used in the threatening messages on the walls was bought by Chris months earlier, something he explained away as innocent, saying he and his son bought it for paint gun targets. Chris's father insisted none of this meant his son was guilty. He believed the promise ring Tara bought was just a fling. Chris was trying to escape, but the deeper the police dug, the more the evidence and witnesses Especially Tara's detailed accounts showed how deeply concerning this whole situation became in Florida police. Described Tara as visibly upset, someone who knew details of the affair and had become possessive. She told officers that Chris was careful to cover his tracks, even sending photos to prove he wasn't cheating in some moments, yet the affair was real. The promises of marriage and children discussed things Chris's father said his son tried to back away from but couldn't, while Tara voluntarily cooperated, providing police with texts and messages Chris remained silent on. Guilt. Police then went for a tough approach, confronting him with the reality of what lay ahead if he didn't confess a loss of peace in this life and the next. It wasn't long before Chris Coleman was arrested at his parents' home on May 19, 2009, charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Police revealed he had tried to cover his tracks by spray painting messages on the walls to make it look like someone else committed the murders. After delays and attempts to move the trial, the case finally went to court in April 2011. Jurors were carefully selected from outside the local area, ensuring a fair trial free from local bias. The interrogation laid bare a tangled web of lies, secrets and betrayal, setting the stage for a shocking trial where the truth about Chris Coleman would finally be revealed. After 2 long days and 15 hours of going back and forth, the jury finally made their decision on May 5, 2011, exactly 2 years after Sherry and her 2 sons were murdered. The timing couldn't have been more symbolic. Chris Coleman was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder, but it wasn't easy. One of the jurors, Kim Ferrari, later said that 4 people on the jury weren't fully convinced at first. They needed more, something solid that would erase any lingering doubt, and oddly enough they found it by accident. Tucked away in the jury room from the start were some foam boards with photographs on the back. Those photos showed Chris and his mistress Tara Lintz looking cozy together, and they were clearly dated October 2008. Why did that matter? Because Chris had been insisting all along that he didn't start the affair until November of the same year, after the threatening emails to his wife had already begun, but these photos said otherwise. The affair started earlier than he claimed, which made his whole timeline fall apart, and to the jury that lie was the final nail in the coffin. As soon as they saw those pictures, the mood in the jury room shifted. Juror Kim Ferrari recalled that everyone was finally on the same page. Ferrari said she would have voted for the death penalty without hesitation, and she believed the rest of the jury would have too, but Chris never gave them the chance. Right after the conviction, he suddenly waived his right to be sentenced by the jury and left his punishment in the hands of the judge, Milton Wharton. It was a surprising move, but Ferrari believed she knew why he did it. He knew they were going to send him to death row even if Chris couldn't go to hell, yet Judge Wharton sent him to prison for life without the possibility of parole. No way out, no second chances. Ferrari wasn't disappointed by the life sentence. In fact, she saw it as justice in its own form. He's going to have to sit in prison and think about what he did every day for the rest of his life, she said, and in truth the death sentence wouldn't have changed much. Just 2 months before the trial began, Illinois officially abolished the death penalty. Chris Coleman was sent to Pontiac Correctional Center in Illinois, a high-security prison between Bloomington and Chicago. Later that summer, in August 2011, he was moved to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. The reason was, ironically, safety concerns. He also made an effort to get a new trial, but the judge denied that request too. Chris Coleman will never walk free again, and now he has nothing but time to sit, to think, and to live with the weight of what he did in December 2012. Something heartbreaking happened all over again. The bodies of Cher Coleman and her 2 young sons, Gavin and Garrett, were exhumed from Evergreen Cemetery in Chester, Illinois. They were then reared near Sherry's hometown just outside of Chicago. It was a deeply emotional and controversial decision. Chris Coleman's family fought hard to keep the graves in Chester. In fact, they went to court over Chris's parents Ron and Connie Coleman still lived in the area and felt they had every right to be close to their grandkids' final resting place. After all, they were family too, but the court saw it differently. A judge ruled that a convicted murderer should not have any say in where his victims are laid to rest, especially when his own planned grave site had been right next to theirs. It didn't sit right. The judge ultimately decided it was more appropriate for Sherry and her sons to be buried in a place chosen by her family, not the family of the man found guilty of killing them. Even after the bodies were moved, the original headstone at Evergreen Cemetery remained in place. It had been paid for by Chris's parents, and for a time it stood as a heavy emotional reminder of the lives lost and the complex grief left behind. Chris Coleman didn't stop fighting after his conviction. He and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, but in January 2015 a judge rejected their efforts and upheld both the conviction and his life sentence. But that didn't stop Chris from talking in a phone interview with Crime Watch Daily in April 2018. Chris insisted he was innocent. He even claimed there was a key detail the jury never heard. According to Chris, he had 2 laptops at the time, one that he traveled with and another that stayed either at home or the office. The threats to his wife, he claimed, were linked to the one he didn't carry with him. He seemed to be suggesting that someone else could have sent the emails using the device he left behind. That same month, his father, Pastor Ron Coleman, also defended him on the show. He refused to believe his son could be guilty and said an affair simply wasn't enough reason for murder. Then, in a new legal twist, Coleman's attorneys filed yet another request for a new trial. This time they argued that those extra photographs, the ones the jurors discovered during deliberation, should not have been considered. They claimed the evidence was improper and that it unfairly influenced the verdict. Surprisingly, a judge agreed to take a closer look and granted an evidentiary hearing in March 2019, but after reviewing everything, that same judge denied the appeal in July 2020. So once again, Chris Coleman remained right where he'd been, behind bars, serving a life sentence without parole, still claiming he was framed, still insisting on his innocence. But with the courts shutting him down at every turn, his story wasn't changing any outcomes. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper, thank you for joining me here at MR Night Cared True Crime Stories. Remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.